Hey everyone, welcome back to the YOUnify podcast. If you're new here, my name is Brandyn Keating. I'm the co-founder and CEO of YOUnify, a nonprofit organization helping you flourish and thrive. And I'm also the host of our podcast. I'm really excited to be here today with Josh Sabey, who has squeezed us into his busy travel schedule. Josh is an award-winning film director and producer. He's the winner of Best Documentary at the prestigious Boston Film Festival and is the co-founder of Matters Media. Welcome, Josh. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Brandyn.
Absolutely delighted. And for listeners who may not know much about your work, could you just kind of give a brief thumbnail description about what you do?
Yeah, so at Matters Media, we make media that matters. So we try to tackle the biggest issues, but in non-polarizing ways so that people can approach the issues as people rather than pundits.
I love how you just like casually say like, "Oh, we just approach the biggest issues." Could you give a couple of examples of them?
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about American Tragedy 25, which is about school shootings and guns. We have one coming out for the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Um, we dealt with incarceration, particularly youth incarceration, um, mental health, all the big issues.
all the light, relaxing topics.
Abortion, actually, we have one called the Basement Talks that's
Yeah.
about conversations between pro-choice and pro-life. So we really tackle all the issues.
Yeah, it's really incredible. And so, what first drew you to filmmaking? Was there like a particular moment when you knew this was going to be your path?
I studied English university, so I didn't study film, and I was a recent graduate. And as an English major, you don't have a job when you graduate. So my mom actually wanted to make a documentary, but she didn't have the funding to like hire a crew and everything. And I was a recent graduate, didn't have a job, so I was like, well, let's just buy a camera and make it ourselves.
Wow.
So that was my film school. Was the first documentary we made together called Going Sane.
That's incredible. And such moxie to just be like, "Oh, I'm just going to pick up a camera and do this. No trading. That's cool. Then I'm going to go win some awards. No big deal."
Yeah, a little crazy.
So, how did your personal background and experience shape the kinds of stories you want to tell? These like very, sort of visceral, polarizing social issues.
It started out again with my mom's vision. She
Hmm.
wanted to deal with mental health, and
Mm.
that's its own issue, big, lots of opinions and complexities. So I'll start out with that, and then I think uh, the state of the country, it felt very polarized,
Hmm.
and it felt like there were really big issues, and yet we're having a hard time talking about them. And then documentaries tend to be mostly preaching to the choir, right? They tend to be activist documentaries where
Hmm.
they make a really strong point in a political way and they get people that already agree with them to watch the documentary. That tends to be how most documentaries succeed in the impact spaces by
Yeah.
preaching to the choir. And we want to do something different where we actually reached across the aisle into something that actually we thought if you can build a broad coalition, then you can really bring about real change.
Hmm.
That was our goal.
Yeah, and that is so unusual, that films are really trying to bring people together across different perspectives rather than speaking, um, just to sort of one perspective and gin them up. So I really love the fact that you do that, and I'm curious, when you're choosing a project, when you're choosing one of these meaty topics to try to engage people around across differences, how do you zero in on a particular story? Like, what makes you feel like, oh, this is the story that needs to be told?
I don't know if there's one way. Every movie has been a different process. They're all their
Hmm.
own animal. Um, Sometimes it just, we have access to the story. It's a great story. Sometimes we have funding. Sometimes we don't have funding. There's just
Reality,
so
yep.
many, yeah, so many reality things that every story is its own animal, and whatever gets made, is made for so many reasons. Sometimes it's just a personal project that we really believe in, so we're just going to make it. that was sort of the basement talks where we never really got funding. We just pushed through because we really wanted to tell the story. And then other films, we've been able to get funding for, so we've been able to tell the story. So every film's a little different.
Yeah. Well, and the Basement Talks is a really fascinating one that everybody should see, that I had the pleasure of doing some engagement with you on a little bit. Could you just describe a little bit more about what that story is for folks? Because I think it's a really good illustration of how you show all sides of an issue.
Yeah, so the story's about conversations between pro-choice and pro-life leaders that took place in secret in the 90s. This was after the John Salvi murder, so he went and shot up 3 different abortion clinics. Um,
Mhm. In
Several people were
Massachusetts,
killed
right?
in Massachusetts, and also drove to another state and then shot at it, but no one was killed in that third one.
Mhm.
He killed 2 receptionists and injured 5, 6 other people. And as a result, the leaders of the pro-choice and the pro-life movement started meeting secretly because they really thought, we need to start talking and figuring out how can we lower the rhetoric. How
Mm,
can we prevent violence together? And so they met, and we actually got access to the tapes of all their conversations,
incredible.
sort of accidentally. We weren't really supposed to get access to that. We got access to all of these actual recordings of these actual conversations that were
Mm.
hidden in a vault, secret. No one was really supposed to know about them, and we got their permission to share some of the actual tapes and to tell the story of these 6 women who decided to set aside their differences to come together to protect their communities.
Really incredible story, and it's hard to convey, again, everybody should see the film, and we'll put the links, in the description for Media Matters and for all of Josh's films, but it's hard to convey without actually, maybe having been there at the time or seeing the film, how deeply polarizing the issue was, to the point where they were meeting, like, in this windowless basement because they were so afraid of what would happen if anybody found out, and the one gal, her secretary thought she was cheating on her husband because, she was sneaking around to these conversations over 5 years. So just to give folks a flavor of the deeply polarizing nature, but maybe let's, dig now into American Tragedy, a similarly, deep and visceral issue focused on the Columbine shooting, also back in the 90s. Could you share a little bit about what inspired you to create American Tragedy and how that project first came together?
Yes, that one came out of create our first film, Going Sane. In the process, we met Sue Klebold and learned about her story.
Mhm. And can you
So
just
we
say a little
started.
bit about who Sue is for anybody who doesn't know?
Yeah, so Sue Klebold, she's the mother of Dylan Klebold, who was one of the shooters at Columbine High School.
Mm.
So there were 2 shooters. Dylan was one of them, and this was his mother. So we met her and started talking with her, and learned a little bit about her story. And we were thinking about guns and school shootings, and whenever these happen, we often we often think, how could this possibly happen?
Right.
This was someone with a lot of insight into this question, and someone who was thinking for herself, what could I have done differently? She was
Mm.
asking herself those questions, and had been asking herself those questions for 20 years.
Yeah.
So um, we really thought she had a lot to offer, and she did.
And so, Columbine is a story now that many people feel like they are familiar with, maybe think that they already understand it. In telling the story 20 years later through Sue Klebold's eyes, what new perspective or new insight were you trying to bring or provide to people?
I think it's really common and familiar to just sort of blame the parents, to be like,
Yeah.
this happened because of bad parenting. Uh,
Mhm.
I think part of that is sort of self protection. We want to believe that we're good parents, and so this would never happen to us. And truthfully, that's probably statistically true. Like your child's probably not going to go, shoot up a school.
Right.
But it's also not true that these parents were bad parents. That's not.
Mm.
It's not that simple of an answer.
Yeah, well, and I think probably we also tell ourselves that story because then we're not culpable as a society, right? It's not like our public policy or our systems or how we're behaving as a community. So, whether we're doing it consciously or subconsciously, if it's just appearance, then we don't have to think more deeply about it, right?
Yeah, it's really comforting just to think that parents messed up and why this happens. And if we just, we can blame them and set it aside and stop thinking about it. But, it's way more complicated than that. And, there are things we can do
Yeah,
to prevent school shootings, and there are things we can do to prevent gun deaths.
yeah. So it can't be easy to tell these stories about such painful events. What did you find the most challenging part for this one in particular for American tragedy?
I think what was complicated was Sue's story, right? Her child killed a lot of other children, and
Mhm,
there are a lot of victims. And so, how do you now go and tell her story, right?
mm,
So that's one ethical question, that you obviously have to face. Um, there's also a question on our what level of this is just sort of like a voyeuristic,
yeah.
look under the hood. We all there's lots of that out there already in documentaries. Trying, a matter of fact, pretty much every major network had tried to get Sue to tell her story, and they
Mhm,
all wanted that sort of voyeuristic, intrigue of like what was happening in the household. And we wanted to do something more than that. We didn't. We wanted to be much more than just intriguing people's voyeuristic tendencies.
yeah.
Uh, and so we needed to be doing something with the film. It needed to be a film with a purpose,
Mhm,
um, not just preachy. Again, we try not to be um, political in the sense of like taking a side and saying this is what we need to do, uh, but to open up a conversation and to lead people in a direction that could actually drive real and lasting change from both sides of the aisle.
yeah. And what do you And there's a particular change that y'all are kinda working for, right? Like, there's an action that you are hoping people will take coming out of the film, and I think you've been very thoughtful about what is an action that people could take across the political spectrum. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so we try not to be political, but that doesn't mean we try not to say anything. Right?
Mhm,
We do. So part of the film is Sue's insight, right? And
mhm,
it's her takeaway from what her child did and what she's come to terms with, and that is that she always saw mental illness as something that you address. If someone gets sick, they get
mhm,
treated.
mhm.
And it wasn't until after everything went down that she had her own, bouts of depression and anxiety and all of that, and she really got into and she realized that her own son was deeply depressed, and that's the
Mm,
only way that he was a good son. He was on top of things. He wasn't the one she was worried about. She had another son that she was more worried about. He was the one that
wow.
was on top of things. And so the way that he got involved with this was through depression, and she sees his involvement as a murder suicide.
Mm,
And her takeaway, like when she goes back into her life, what she wishes she had done differently, it's changing how she thinks about mental illness and instead focusing on mental health from a young age. She talks about she taught children, to safety in Colorado around rattlesnakes, safety, fire safety, like all these different safety, but nothing about mental health. She wasn't teaching them mental health skills and like what if you start to feel depressed? What are skills you can use? So she just feels like that, to her that was her biggest failure was
mm,
not teaching mental health skills, so that he didn't have them when he needed them. So that's her takeaway, and
mhm,
so that becomes a big part of the film is her insights into that. Then we also discuss gun control, right? Because this is another big part of the question. Again, try not to be political. We try to talk about when we're thinking of school shootings, how do we think about guns?
mm,
And because oftentimes it's either like gun control or mental health,
mhm.
and
As though the
reality
2
is
are in opposition to one another.
exactly. But in reality, they're interrelated in complex ways.
Mhm.
Most gun deaths, are handguns through suicide, and yet most of our legislation are all about, you know, these military style rifles. And so when you actually break down the dichotomy and the political, division, you actually get into really interesting places where you can start thinking about how do we actually prevent gun deaths,
Mm,
radically? How do we actually, what kind of legislation would actually decrease gun deaths? And those are interesting questions when you're able to put down just the polarized talking points.
Amazing. And just it seems like something you've learned is that keeping those handguns that people own or whatever it is that they own locked away can make like in a literally like in a lockbox can make a huge difference in and of itself. Is that right?
Yeah. So again, this is a way in which mental health and gun deaths are interrelated. So suicidality tends to come in waves, and there's
Mhm.
really intense moments. And if you have if you have easy access to a gun, you're much more likely to pull the trigger, right?
Mm.
Whereas if you're able to delay access for a little bit longer, you're much more likely to survive. So there are real ways to decrease gun deaths by suicide. Um, so yeah,
So a simple action that people can take that that can really make a dramatic impact and raising awareness in our communities for people who maybe don't know what a big difference that can make.
yeah. I mean, and not just for like yourself, right?
Mhm.
If you go through depression and get suicidal, like that's one thing is getting guns out of the house. But um, another thing is, when we think of gun safety, it's often like stopping like a stranger breaking in to steal your
Right.
gun kind of a thing, having it locked away. But it's much more likely that your own child, right, is going to get access. And so it's about how do you make sure that your children don't have access to guns, right? How do you make sure that they can't just easily get it when they go through a bout of depression? And so how do you keep it locked away? Not from a thief who's breaking in for an hour, but someone that's there with you 24/7. It's a
Right.
different kind of mentality and different kinds of safety to think about. And again, this is when we start to break down the political talking points. We can get to really interesting territory where we can all come to think what would actually help and then save lives.
Yeah, well, and I think it's as you were saying earlier, it's easy to think, um, well, my kid's fine. It's not going to be my kid or my family member, my brother, my sister, my mother, my father. Um, And in reality, these things don't always show on the surface, like in Suit Klebold's case, where we're on the surface, Dylan was checking all the boxes and was the one she wasn't worried about. So whether we're worried or not, whether anything is showing on the surface or not, a really um, it could certainly save the lives of somebody that we love or our community members. So I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for Sue's example, she did have a year that she was worried about him the year
Mhm.
before Columbine, and they did a lot to try to help him out. And then she thought they were through it, right? And she didn't know
Mm.
that it was lingering. I think a lot of parents, you think you got through something, but maybe you're not all the way through it, and you don't know. So just the knowing gun safety, knowing different skills to protect, knowing different ways to protect your own children, your own family, and your community is important.
Awesome. So, folks, we are going to include all the links to Josh's company, his website, Media Matters, and the affiliated nonprofit Parents to Parents in the description. So, you'll be able to check out that there. And you'll also be able to join. A screening that we're doing nationally of the film where you can screen it in your local community center, your home, your library locally, and bring people together to really get some more awareness about these simple steps that we can take to make a big difference. And doing so in community in a fun environment. We'll have a panel with the filmmakers and some experts along and some Q&A. So we'll be doing this virtually and live here in LA. The details to get involved, if you'd like to learn more about how to host or attend an event, will also be in the description on YouTube and across our socials in LinkedIn, in the link in bio. And of course, if you're enjoying the podcast, if you feel like you're getting something out of it, we really invite you to like, share, help more people get the information, comment, add in your questions and experiences, um, and uh, and help us get the word out about the important message that Josh and his films have. So, Josh, I'm curious with American Tragedy, is there anything that surprised you about how audiences have responded to the film?
I think maybe it's a surprise, but we're really grateful that millions of people have watched it, right?
Yeah.
People were interested. People wanted to hear from Sue. They wanted to understand. Um, what she saw, what she didn't see, and what that could mean for us.
Yeah.
And so I think that the response has been surprising and really rewarding, that millions of people have watched it, and that it has started a national conversation around guns, around mental health, around school shootings, all these issues that are complex and interrelated, and that we can talk about, from different sides of the political issue and actually bring insights, right? People
Mm.
that love guns and live around guns have really valuable insights to the conversation, and people that do research at universities have really valuable insights in the conversation, and people who have dealt with mental health issues in their family, which is almost everyone, have valuable insights. So when we bring people together instead of siloing people, we end up with much better solutions, and much more, effective solutions.
Awesome. And now, if somebody is like listening and watching, and maybe they haven't seen the film yet, and they're thinking like, that's a long time ago. Like, why is that relevant now? There have been, unfortunately, um, lots of shooting incidents since. Um, what in particular about this story is important right now for us to sort of consider and think about?
Yeah, I mean, there's a story in every single shooting.
Mhm.
Columbine is unique in the sense that it's sort of the mother of all shootings. It's not really the first.
Right.
Uh, it's not the most deadly. It's not the top of anything, but it is the one that people remember. It was the first really big news story, with 24-hour TV. There's all sorts of reasons that it became sort of the hallmark story, but for all those reasons, it is. Columbine is that story that, everyone remembered and remembers, and so it was just a story. You could have picked a lot of stories, but this was a story, and it had the
Mhm.
benefit of hindsight, right? You have the benefit of a mother who had 20 years to process what had happened, and the first several years were, denial, right? So there was a whole bunch of processing she had to do to get to the point where she was now. She had, that 2020 vision. She was able to look back, I think, more honestly and more, removed. She was able to really look at it, in a new way. So I think that distance actually was valuable for the film.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And for yourself as a brand new filmmaker, pretty close to brand new, self-taught, how did you balance telling a story that would be impactful and help people have these tough conversations across differences and move to action? How did you balance, that sort of interest in having an impact with the emotional sensitivity around the topic and Sue Klebold's experience?
We try to. I mean, most of that happens in the edit, right? You go
Mhm.
and you gather all of these things, and then you're in the edit and you're trying to figure out how do we tell the story. Who gets cut from the story,
Yeah.
um, and there's hard decisions. We had
Mhm.
interviewed some people, from Sandy Hook that got cut for personal reasons, right? They were going through something
Mhm.
and it just wasn't the right time for their story to be in it. So there's all sorts of complex, um, you know, things to weigh in an edit, and you do the best you can. For us, we also have, our mission of impact filmmaking, right? So we're not just
Mhm.
trying to make money; we're trying to have impact, and so views are more important to us, than sales. So that's
Mhm.
that's another thing, is how do we actually get people, and then not just views, but views that lead to something. So
Right.
we're also thinking through that. How do we do something that's more than, again, this voyeuristic, money
Yeah.
making film? How do we do something that actually drives impact, that actually makes a difference? And so those are a whole set of different questions: is how do you make a film that actually gets people to think about things differently, or more efficiently, or more effectively?
Mm. And so, in the fact that you are making documentaries, you're telling stories of things that happened in the world, generally speaking. Do you see yourself more as a storyteller, a journalist, something in between?
It's an interesting, place to be in the kinds of film we've generally made. We've made a variety of different films, but most of them are sort of mosaic in nature, in the sense we don't have a narrator. So you're
Hmm.
using pieces, of interviews, and it feels very mosaic. It's like, how do we put these together to create a bigger picture? And,
Mm.
and sometimes it's frustrating because it's like, man, I wish I could just say what I want to say. But you don't get
Voiceover
to.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You don't get to, and you have to use what other people say, and be. I think there's something really interesting about it too, because then it's their story and they get to tell it, and it's their words.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I wish we could say things differently, but we can't. Where it's their story, and it's both fun and frustrating and interesting, and but mostly I just feel privileged to be able to hear the stories and then find a way to tell them powerfully.
Yeah, and, so after American Tragedy, you followed on with a story called Blue Baby. Could you share briefly what that story is about?
Yeah, so that's about incarcerated youth,
Mhm,
and mostly about how ineffective it is to incarcerate youth,
mhm,
and some other approaches. So there's a place called Boys Town in Omaha. It's spread also, and there's similar things that where they take a completely different model to incarceration. So instead of punishing youth for bad behavior, which is again sort of this way of removing societal responsibility to be like, well, these youth are behaving poorly, so let's punish them. It just gives them a situation where they can flourish. It gives them the structure, it gives them the skills. So instead of seeing it as sort of like an individual problem, it's a
mhm.
skill deficiency. And so that they see bad behavior as skill deficiency. And so they're trying to supplement those children with the structure and the care they need to gain those skills so they can be more productive and successful in life.
Yeah, yeah, I love that you mentioned the word flourishing, something that we think a lot about in Unify, and of course, leadership for flourishing is something we work on a lot here. And I'm just curious, just for you personally, is there something right now in your life that is challenging your flourishing, and maybe something that is helping you flourish and thrive?
I think we're lucky in this in that we have really interesting work, meaningful
Mm,
work to do. I think that the biggest challenge is too much work, right? Getting stuck in
mhm.
sort of always working, particularly as sort of self-employed, right? Where we're running the business.
Yeah,
Um,
well, and then we
you get
include your
stuck in,
wife, Sarah, right?
yeah, yeah. So we
Yeah.
work together on everything, and so um, it can be a situation where you're just always working, and I think that's probably our biggest challenge. Is we also have 3 kids, and so it's always have time for the family. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge is to get the work done, to keep the projects coming and impact, but not get too bogged down by all the work.
Yeah, how do you stay motivated?
I don't think I have a problem with that. I don't know. I stay pretty motivated. I don't, probably the biggest problem is just fatigue. We just
Yeah,
have so many projects. So fatigue can can be a real thing. It's sort of like burnout.
yeah,
So I think having moments to recharge and what I like to do when my kids come home from school. In the evening. Actually, we have dinner together as a family, and then we go out and play for an hour, and that's a huge recharge for me to just as a family go out and play. We play soccer or basketball or whatever. And these are little kids, so this
yeah.
is pretty
How old
pretty
are
easy.
they?
So the oldest is 7, the youngest is less than a year old.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's fun, but that's a huge recharge just to be outside, to be playing as with my kids, and we try to do that every day.
That's such a brilliant ritual. So our time has absolutely flown by. My last quick question for you is, if somebody is watching and they feel like, geez, I'd like to take a first step towards maybe it's making impact films like you, maybe it's something else that is a driving passion that maybe they haven't figured out how to take a first step on. Is there any advice you would give of one simple step forward to take based on your experience of diving into filmmaking headfirst?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing on this, I guess I do this over and over again in the sense of it's just day by day, right? You do little pieces. You don't do a whole edit in a day. You really wish you could. You wish you could like get everything into your head and
Yeah.
edit it, but you have to cut it into little pieces and do this little bit today, this little bit tomorrow, and be okay with that. And same with
Mhm.
writing. I've written some books, and you just got to do a little chapter at a time. I tried to write a book without chapters, um, as it was avant-garde of me. Tons of people have done that. Tons of people have done that, but
Yeah.
it was so hard when you
Yeah.
when you have this huge thing. It was like impossible to edit, and so just breaking things into little bits, and it's amazing how much you get done when you just add days to days to days. Right? You just work at it a little bit at a time, and eventually you have a whole book. So it's just about getting those little pieces done.
Amazing. Yeah, that old aphorism of eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Exactly. It's so
Fantastic.
true though. Like for reals, all the time I have to just say, this is what I'm gonna get done today, and just set
Mhm.
aside the like, oh, but what about all these other things?
Yeah.
Just a little bit. Just this is what I'm gonna do today.
Fantastic advice. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Josh. Thanks everybody for listening and watching. Again, we'll have all the links to watch American Tragedy and all of Josh's other films down in the description on YouTube and across our socials. And if you'd like to join the screening in September, we would love to engage you with that. Really great way to make a difference in your own community. So the links to learn more about that will be in the description as well. Thanks again for joining us, Josh.
Thank you. Glad to have been a part of it and love what you're doing.
Awesome. Thanks, Josh. And where are you traveling right now, by the way?